Greetings and welcome to Trinity Radio. I'm Jonathan Pritchett, and along with me today is Joshua Klein. How you doing, Josh?
I'm doing fantastic.
Josh, he works for a church in Omaha, and he's also a part of Free Thinking Ministries alongside Dr. Tim Stratton, and he is currently a PhD student at Kairos University. Welcome to the show.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, today we're going to be talking about James Talarico, who just won the Democrat primary for the U.S. Senate seat in Texas. He is a Presbyterian seminarian. He's currently, I think, in the House of Representatives there in Texas. And he defeated Jasmine Crockett, who was in the U.S. House of Representatives from Texas. And, I had never heard of this guy at all until my Twitter feed or X feed got flooded with video clips. And he's an interesting guy, to say the least. He's actually a progressive Christian. So I'm guessing the Presbyterian USA version of Presbyterian. But I didn't know much about him. Is that about how he came upon your radar?
Yeah, I think I saw an interview with him and Joe Rogan maybe a year ago. I didn't see the whole interview, but he was making some progressive arguments on scripture. It was kind of after the whole Wes Huff thing. And so then Talarico got on there and was like, no, that's not what the Bible actually says. The Bible's actually pro-choice. And then he started angling for the Senate. And I think he's been in you said this, right? He's been in the Texas House of Representatives. Yeah. And so now he's seeking a Senate seat.
Yeah. Nothing says Texas like a progressive leftist Christian, right?
Right.
Sure. But what I wanted to get your take on some of these clips that have been floating around. So I downloaded a bunch and grabbed them. But before I do want to give a shout out to what happened in the Arkansas primary in Lonoke County. I've been following the story of Aaron Spencer, who he is a military veteran. He's a homesteader, and his daughter was abducted in the middle of the night. And his dog was barking. He discovered his daughter gone. And so he got in his truck and went driving around looking for him, spotted her in a truck with a guy named Michael Fosler, who was currently on 43 charges against him, a lot of them related to the PDF file stuff and sexual assaults of minors and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so he tried to get him to pull over to get his 13-year-old daughter out of the car, and eventually had to run him out of the road. And then there was apparently a struggle in which he ended up killing Fosler. And he had called 911 twice that night, once to report her missing and once to say that he spotted him. But eventually he took matters in his own hands. And Fosler ended up dead, which is understandable if you're a father and your daughter had just been kidnapped. But for reasons that escape everybody, the local prosecuting attorney of the county, this Graham, I can't remember his first name, Chuck Graham maybe, decided to prosecute that and press charges for second-degree murder. They have lost evidence. A lot of stuff's gone on with the pretrial hearings and motions and stuff. But nonetheless, he decided to run for county sheriff because he'd had enough. Apparently, there's a lot of corruption. And with 54% of the vote in the county, he won the Republican primary against the incumbent and another challenger who each got, I don't know, the other divide that, 20 some odd percent apiece. So he took down both challengers while has a pending murder trial for killing his daughter's kidnapper / rapist. So, I don't know if we can say that word or not, but that's what he was.
Yeah.
Alleged. Of course, we know what was going on at middle of the night, right? What he was doing. So I was happy about that because I've been following that story, and he won his primary, and that was a district, our county in Arkansas, where Trump carried it 75%. So in the general election, you know where it's going to go. And everyone's calling on the prosecution there to drop the charges. The judge has already been kicked off the bench for the case, trying to put ridiculous gag orders and banning cameras from the trial and all of that stuff. And they're like, no, the Arkansas State Supreme Court overruled her, removed her from the bench and removed the gag order. So that made me happy. I don't know if you were familiar with that story.
I was vaguely familiar with it. I didn't know about the judge being kicked off the case and that stuff. But
yeah,
I do think that it's ridiculous to, charge a man who's defending his daughter from
right, and in Arkansas, no less.
Yeah.
And it's like everyone is like, "What in the world are you doing?" It was like, "Well, that's vigilante justice and all." So, it's actually called defense of others, right?
Yeah.
But if they're gonna let a guy out on bail who has 43 charges of all of this PDF file stuff and essay stuff against minors, you failed as
Yes.
a judge.
That's the justice system's incompetence. Why do I have to pay the penalty for your incompetence when I'm protecting my daughter?
Right. This is blood red Arkansas, and they're dealing with this. And yeah, and what's interesting to me is the fact that he decided that he was going to run as county sheriff and potentially become the boss of his arresting officers in the case. So, but the deputy prosecutor is actually an ex brother-in-law of mine, and yeah. So I know I don't think the prosecutor himself. This is kind of like the Rittenhouse thing, where the prosecutor gave it to the underling guy. I called him the Timu Pritchett back then when I had short spiky hair, and he was because he was the deputy prosecutor on that case with Rittenhouse, and thank goodness he lost. But everyone's like, there is no point when your daughter is abducted that her life is not in danger, and self-defense and defense of others applies.
Yeah.
But what I think they said was they're trying to argue different things, like he wanted, he had like a vengeance thing against the guy or something, and they don't like the fact that he unloaded an entire magazine into the guy and then pistol whipped him afterwards. And I'm like, if it was my daughter, I would have unloaded the magazine and then reloaded it again, emptied it before I got to the pistol whipping the corpse, because there's no amount of, he's not more dead, right?
Yeah.
So, but there's no amount of retribution you can bring upon a person like that.
Now, you probably agree with me on this. Well, maybe you don't. I don't know, but I am all for public execution of sexual predators like that.
Absolutely.
Like, it needs to be a public execution.
Yeah. When we talk about cruel and unusual punishment in the Constitution, what did they allow for at the time that was written?
That's
so. Whatever was allowed then at the time that it was written, you can't say it's retcon everything you don't like is cruel and unusual back at if you're an originalist with the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like,
and isn't it funny that you also have a right to a speedy trial, but our trials take for freaking ever on these sorts of things? Like, there's no reason for him to be out on bail. We know what he did. Let's get the trial over with and present the gospel to him. See if he rejects it. Then we can execute him. There you
go.
That's the way I see it. Anyway.
Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to mention that at the top because I've been following that case, and it's Aaron Spencer for Lonoke County Sheriff. You guys can Google that story, but it's I'm from Arkansas originally, so I keep up with local politics. But let's get into James Talarico, and I'm going to play this first clip. Just insane stuff here, but let's hear what he has to say about transgenderism and abortion.
Before we go further, I want to acknowledge that our trans community needs abortion care too. Defending trans Texans is something we have to do every day at the state capitol. And you better believe I'll be giving sermons on that too. So when I use the word woman, it should not be understood as an exhaustive term, but rather as a lens through which to understand, examine, and interrogate patriarchy. Similar to how we specify anti-Black racism when.
Okay. So I'm guessing he means trans men What do you mean? Because,
I would hope.
but he
Who
didn't
knows?
specify. He didn't clarify. He just said, "I'm using women as a catch-all," which means he doesn't really know how to define the term either.
No,
But
and he says that the term is specifically only being used to examine patriarchy. That's
yeah,
that's what it's used for. It's not used for designating who can have kids.
right, biological sex and things. You know, the entire human history of the subject of woman until 10 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, this kind of stuff is insane. Number one, trans women, they can't get pregnant. So when you say, you know, trans, but I've heard enough insanity to think that, yeah, we need, you know, trans women need to be able to have abortions because they have quote unquote periods and all of this stuff. And it's just, it's like, no, they don't.
Yeah. No, they don't. They bleed. If they have quote unquote a period at all, it's because they've had bottom surgery and they bleed out of a cavity that they have now mutilated themselves with. And so that's not a period. That's called a wound.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. So this kind of, but when you hear a person talking like that and say, I'm going to give sermons on this.
Yeah.
This is actually nothing new. Okay. And there's going to be a clip later where we'll get into this more, but crazy sermon clips from the PCUSA and the Episcopalian Church, especially the one right across from the Capitol. I mean, this is nothing new from these main lines that have been constantly going left. You know, we recently had a split with the Methodist Church. For some reason, the conservatives won, and then they had to leave, which I don't understand how the General Assembly works on that. And like they wanted to crush the vote of the Africans, the delegates to the thing, because of course they're not racist, but those Africans, they're too conservative, so we don't like what they have to say. I mean, all this stuff is just maddening to me, but
yeah. Well, I think the book of Revelation talks about Christ saying your lampstand will be removed to the church. And I think a lot of these mainline denominations, this is what happens when the lampstand is removed. And now you have the gospel of the Antichrist, which is fulfill yourself, self-actualization, pride, and let's celebrate mutilation and murder as a sacrament. It's literally the upside down of what Christ actually brought as far as the gospel goes. So that's why I call it Antichrist. It's opposing the gospel and confusing people.
Absolutely. And I know with the Methodist Church, I mean, I have to hand it to my Calvinist brothers in Christ, because they're probably like, finally an Arminian denomination has gone crazy, because it's always these Reformed traditions and Lutheran traditions too, you know, that have gone crazy. But finally, a Wesleyan Arminian tradition has gone crazy. But you know, not to make this about Calvinism, but I always like, there was a quote from Al Mohler several years ago where he said, well, Calvinism is the last bastion of conservative Christianity. It's the last bulwark against progressivism. And I'm thinking, Al Mohler, you brought in a ton of progressive theology by all of the people that you platformed. And this has always been the case. I present the PCUSA and the Episcopal Church as, you know, Anglican offshoot. They're quasi-Calvinists. And I'm like, and then all of Europe as counter evidence that Calvinism does not keep out liberalism, you know?
Yeah, he probably was literally only referring to the Calvinist people in the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah, except that would include Danny Aiken. It would include Russell Moore, who were all working for Mohler before they went to their respective positions elsewhere. Kevin Ezell, all of these progressive, you know, he was at the Gospel Coalition and together, he was on both of those boards, you know, that gave us Chandler and Platt and all the woke white Calvin. I call them wokevinists. And, you know, D.A. Carson's woke. He's been woke for years, you know. People are like, D.A. Carson. Yes, D.A. Carson, Mark Dever, all of those people. And I'm like, yeah, Calvinist traditions have produced not only their fair share of liberals, but more liberals than other denominations. But yeah, and this guy, Presbyterian USA, Reformed. You know,
Yeah.
they're Westminster folk. It's like, oh, they don't believe a word of it. Well, that's just that's just cope. Right. I mean, how many lesbian bishops running around saying predestined this way, you know? So that's
true. When you talk about determined, everything is determined, and then you say, well, then God created me this way for His glory and for His good. And my issue with some of them is, well, obviously they're all inconsistent, but they'll say, I was determined to be this way, and so that means it's good. But then they'll still affirm like the doctrine of original sin, and I'll be like, okay, well, what about your sin? Well, that is now no. Sin is a part of the oppressor framework. It's not actually anything that I do. It's whether or not I'm actually part of the group that oppresses people. That's what sin actually is.
Yeah, and determinism is actually the great free pass on that if you're a progressive Christian, right? I mean, God created you this way for His glory, purpose, and whatever. And then if you can skew the biblical text the way progressives do to be more inclusive and all of that stuff, then sure, that's as good of a platform to launch a liberal progressive theology as any. And the reason why I'm going on about this is because Calvinists have picked on everyone else as compromisers. So we're gonna throw that back at you folks, because this one's one of yours, and no true Scotsman stuff. We don't play that game around here.
Yeah. Even though I think in an interview recently, and maybe this is a clip we get to, he said something about all religions lead to the same truth or something like that. So he would be outside of most Calvinists would reject him as part of the
and I think most, even the more woke Calvinists, would reject that claim as well, because they have to have some semblance of conservatism to push their progressive politics, or they'd get run out of town. But so they're not going to go that far. But I don't know if I don't think I have that clip, but it sounds like every other clip that we're going to hear today. So let's go ahead and move to the second clip. This is, I think, from some sort. He's given some sort of testimony somewhere, but it's about transgendered kids.
Trans children are God's children, made in God's own image. There's nothing wrong with them. Nothing at all. They are perfect, they are beautiful, and they are sacred. Bullying children is immoral. It's a sin, a special kind of sin.
Well, here he says things that should they be bullied? No. Are they made in the image of God? Yes.
Yes.
Are they perfect? No. But that's contrary to all Christian theology. There's actually, they're in a fallen world. Let's suppose that they have some sort of gender dysmorphia, or just I think more likely the social contagion of the trendiness of it, more than anything.
Or they have autism.
Yeah, but they grow out of it. I mean, they all grow out of it relatively quickly. So it's somewhat misleading here, because to me, this kind of statement that yes, that they're made in the image of God, but that doesn't mean that there's not something wrong with them, right?
Yes. Well, and I reject the framing at the very beginning. It says trans children. Just that term in general, I think, is contradictory. There's no such thing as a trans child. There's confused children.
Yes.
But transing a child is something that happens to them. If we're going to go with children can't reason and can't really think for themselves, there's a reason kids can't buy firearms or alcohol, or they can't. There's a reason we have age limits on adult content. There's because kids are vulnerable and they can't really think for themselves. I mean, they need to be taught how to think. Then we say, well, trans children are sacred. Be like, well, but you're now foisting the label trans on these kids. That is not a thing. There's no such thing as trans children. There's abused children and there's confused children. Those are the two categories. So I reject his outright framing, Because when you can frame it that way, then everything that follows, I would agree. We shouldn't bully kids.
Yeah.
We shouldn't, but the framing is what's wrong.
Yeah, and your two categories, there's a Venn diagram where parents of quote unquote trans kids would be right in the center, because they are probably feeding into the confusion and its abuse, in my opinion, especially once you start seeking out chemical or surgical alterations to the children. I think that is child abuse. And so, there's a lot of sin going on, and I'm not saying that children aren't without any sin whatsoever. But when we're talking about the younger children, or even, before age of making legal decisions on their own, just even teenagers, even, as much credit as we like to give teenagers in centuries past for basically being adults by their teen years, you can't do that in our culture, because we perpetuate adolescence forever.
Yeah.
And then of course they talk about the brain's not fully developed till 25, and that's probably somewhat accurate. But I also think that culture can foist upon maturity, and at least in times past, it by necessity. But our culture has coddled people well into their 30s, so it's a little bit different. So I would say, yeah, they're not only fully developed in their brain, but they are not culturally conditioned to mature very young. So the idea that they can make these kinds of decisions even into their teens is insane, which is why we don't let them get tattoos or body piercings without parental signature and all of that. So to me, this kind of idea of well, these kids are perfect the way they are, that's nonsense. Instead of seeking treatment, we're encouraging this stuff. And what the sin was, a bigger sin than bullying, is causing kids to stumble. I'm sorry, but as much as the ECLA and the PCUSA want to get out there and quote their sparkle creeds and stuff, most of the transgender community and the LGBT community in general aren't even progressive Christians. They're not buying into that either. Right. They're not showing up for church. I don't care how inclusive you are. All you're doing is elderly abuse with the 9 people over 70 that still show up. So that's all nonsense to me, because you are the one who deserve. People like James Talarico are the ones that are doing the more heinous sin. And Jesus says, when you cause them to stumble, which that's exactly what they're doing, that's millstone territory.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Jesus has really strong words for causing one of these little ones to stumble, and that is, I mean, think of it this way: if we let kids define everything about themselves through the age of 16, there is an element of coddling, but part of that coddling is telling kids, you can define yourself for what yourself is, instead of saying, hey, there's a role you're supposed to play in society, and my job is to prepare you for that role. Like, that's what good parenting is. Now we've changed it to, well, I can take care of you financially. You don't have to get a job. You can sit and play video games, and you can define reality around yourself. You are the center of your own world, and that is, you talked about the physical abuse of the chemical castration and the surgical interventions. I think that is a form of abuse, when you are stunting emotional growth and stunting maturity. When they get out into a world where somebody disagrees with them, that's when you got shrieking people saying, I need my safe space, because they haven't been prepared to actually play the role they're supposed to play in society. When you think that, men are supposed to protect, and then there are people wanting to, there are people that will say, well, why did he have to shoot that guy that was going to molest his daughter 9 times? Why couldn't he have just shot him in the leg, or called the police and let them deal with it? Like, we have a really warped understanding of masculinity and what we're preparing young men to do, because we're letting young men and young women decide reality for themselves, and then saying, tut, yeah, you can do that. And if anyone disagrees with you, they're the problem.
Yeah. Well, the maturity issue, that is rampant. And I think the school systems have failed in educating people properly to be able to think, rationally anyway, because they're just fed propaganda in the public schools. And not too many, I'm starting to see more stories about, even your private Christian schools are no longer safe in a lot of these private Christian schools now.
Yeah. Yeah. And my kids go to public school right now, but we were very specific about which district we have open enrollment in Nebraska. That's where I am, which district they would enroll in. And we're very active in asking questions and reading the curriculum and getting to know the teachers and challenging. So my son is not exactly well liked in his class.
No doubt. You should run for school board and be the one who says, we are not telling speakers to shut up when they want to complain to us about kiddie porn in the classroom. You should run for the school board and be the based school board guy that says, you're not throwing that guy off the podium. You're not silencing him. You're going to listen. you know, I'm waiting for one school board video where one of the school board members tells the others to quit harassing the speaker, shut up and let him speak, But we just don't see it. So we need based dads out there to get out school board members.
That's fair. Maybe I should.
Yeah. Be the change according to Gandhi or something, right? Be the change. He said something along those
something like
that. The Incarnation. This is from the Joe Rogan show, which I hope he doesn't, challenge the the video copyright claim, but hopefully it'll be far enough in he doesn't care. But here we go. This is on the Incarnation and abortion. This is insane.
I say all this in context of abortion because before God comes over Mary and we have the Incarnation, God asks for Mary's consent, which is remarkable. I mean, go back and read this in Luke. I mean, the angel comes down and asks Mary if this is something she wants to do. And she says, if it is God's will, let it be done. Let it be. Let it happen. So to me, that is an affirmation in one of our most central stories that creation has to be done with consent. You cannot force someone to create. Creation is one of the most sacred acts that we engage in as human beings. But that has to be done with consent. It has to be done with freedom. And to me, that is absolutely consistent with the ministry and life and death of Jesus. And so that's how I come down on that side of the issue.
So because Mary said, see, I am the Lord's servant, Mary said, may it happen to me as you have said, that means that you can get abortions because creation requires consent because Mary consented to the Incarnation.
Did Adam consent to being created?
Right. Or Eve for that matter.
What?
Yeah. Mary consented to being impregnated, which is not it doesn't follow that therefore abortion is permissible because childbirth requires consent. What follows is impregnation requires consent. So let's outlaw rape and other stuff and punish it severely, right? Let's punish rape with the cruel and unusual punishments by today's standards that were the norm in previous generations. Let's do that because that follows more. You could make an argument for executing rapists who impregnate women against their consent a lot easier than you could argue Mary consented to this, so now women can abort their babies up to birth.
So in his view, if Mary then had second thoughts after she conceived and was like, you know what, I don't want to do this anymore, she would have been totally within her rights to abort the living fully God, fully fetus in her womb. That's his argument. She could have aborted Jesus.
Yes. Which totally doesn't follow, but he's also forgetting so much about what the Bible says about murdering the innocents and child sacrifice to gods like, Baal, Molech, or we could toss in convenience and supposed mental health, which is the umbrella excuse to have abortions up until 9 months, because you can say, well, it's a mental issue. That's kind of the workaround that they use in a lot of the states before Roe v. Wade got overturned was, well, the health of the mother included mental health, not just she could physically get really,
it wasn't the life of the mother was at risk. It was,
right.
Well, the health of the mother, she's not going to be able to make a good living. She's going to feel burdened by this child, so she needs to be able to get rid of it.
Well, when you hear life, like either life-threatening or health-threatening, like severe physical harm from which will permanently change her life forever, you don't think mental health when you think life and health. You think, oh, like it's going to require hours of post-delivery surgery and all kinds of other life full of medical complications. No, the health was so vague that it was, it's going to be an inconvenience or she's going to be sad.
But in 99% of those in the life of the mother cases, as long as it's after 25 weeks, you can do mitigation procedures in which you can try to save the baby and the mother. Probably the difference is like ectopic pregnancies are both unviable, like they aren't ever brought to term. They can't be. And they will kill the mother if they are attempted to. So that's probably the exception. But 99% of the other ones where it's quote unquote the life of the mother, our medical interventions are so advanced now that you can actually try to, you might not succeed, but you can actually try to save both.
Yeah.
So even that.
But to try to use the incarnation there's a huge chasm.
Yes.
Between incarnation and therefore abortion should be legal because Mary consented to being impregnated by the Holy Spirit. Therefore, women should be able to slaughter the babies in the womb. That's like the biggest non sequitur ever. You could, like I said, you could make the argument the other way that if you wanted anything to follow at all, it should be impregnation requires consent. So therefore, anyone who impregnates anyone outside of their consent, you punish the man who impregnated. You don't punish the child anyway. So my argument follows way more than this huge non sequitur and huge chasm that you have to bridge that can't be bridged from incarnation, therefore abort babies. It's just
what's the word I'm looking for? It's flashy rhetoric. It sounds good on first hearing to people that aren't really thinking clearly. So they go, wow, I've never really thought of that. He said it so beautifully. And it's like, yeah, but once you analyze it, it doesn't hold up even to the tiniest scrutiny because it's completely invalid reasoning.
Creation, and he's talking about childbirth, requires consent. Well, just because you've never heard someone frame it that way doesn't mean that it's actually good, like you said. But worse, the reason why no one frames it that way is because it's stupid.
Yes.
Yeah. You've never heard it that way before because it's so stupid that no one would have the temerity to even speak it out loud had the thought even occurred to them.
Yes. Do you know, I don't remember this because it was a long time ago. Do you know how Joe Rogan responded? Did he just go, wow, like typical Joe Rogan?
I don't know. I just downloaded the clip of that segment that I found on Twitter. I didn't listen to the whole interview, but I'm sure he probably did his usual, oh, okay. Joe Rogan is not, a conservative type person by any stretch of the imagination. And I know people are praying for him, and yes, you should always pray for that. But don't think that until he's like on board with Team Jesus that he's actually on your side. I mean, he's kind of
no, he is a left. He is to the left. He's a liberal, but he's not a leftist.
Right.
So those are two different things. And he would definitely be persuaded by pro-choice biblical arguments because I think that's part of the problem of where he's at right now. For me, is he's really interested in Christianity, but I think he's also very enticed by a Christianity that can also incorporate some of his liberal views, and so that's the danger of that investigation.
Yeah. Progressive Christianity is like the easiest form of Christianity for certain. I want to make that not true though. I want progressive Christianity to be a social stigma. I want it to be, but unfortunately, people can talk about the Overton window shifting in 2024. Yes and no. But I mean, Gen Z, based going back to church Gen Z, no, that's like on the upper end, 27, 28% of them.
Yeah. And I think when people say that, they go, well, they're more conservative now than millennials were at their age.
Yes. But
which,
that's all cope.
Yes. Which doesn't actually ensure anything. It's like we're going, well, then that for sure means there'll be conservatives later. Some of them will be, well, maybe, but that doesn't actually follow. You can't say that that's the case because it's a different time period.
Right.
So,
I mean, I bought into that hype too, but then I stepped back from the table and said, I need to really look at this. Is this happening? Oh, no, it's not happening. The one good sign is neither woke people nor anyone else want to watch woke movies. And so Hollywood is currently being flushed down the commode. So that's the one place where woke is dying because nobody wants to watch it on television or in the theater. So that's one thing that you can chalk up as a win. But we've seen no improvement in the video game culture yet. So everyone's buying games from Japan and stopped buying American studio games. Music hasn't changed much. But music, you actually find more balance left and right from musicians than you used to. But there's as much as people want to say that things are improving, if you look around, it's small wins. It's not a big cultural shift yet, as people want.
Yeah. And you could say it's got to start somewhere, and that's true. But I think sometimes people are quick to declare victory. Like I think, and I love what Matt Walsh has done, but there was one tweet he said, I think a couple months ago, where he said, "We won on the trans issue. We've won. It's over." And I go, no. As soon as you get too cocky with that sort of thing, that the progressive Christianity, I've been fully convinced is not Christianity at all, because they don't hold to any tenets of the Orthodox Christian faith, as we'll find with James here. But they don't give up. Like, they will find new avenues. It's like when a DEI program closes at a university, it just pops up under a different name. So you actually have to continue to fight in the cultural context. You can't just say we won. And I'm not saying Matt Walsh thinks he can stop fighting, because he seems like someone that just wants to fight all the time. But I think it is dangerous to be like, hey, we're winning, now we can relax. I don't think that's the case.
No, it never stops. You're always going to have progressives, and the revolution is the point, and they're going to keep trying to revolutionize the country, and so you have to constantly fight those forces. And I do want to see major Overton window shift. I do want to see major cultural change in the institutions and all of the of higher learning and the lower education, secondary education. You want to see it in media, but it's usually, we find alternative media ends up doing better than mainstream media in a lot of places. But those you see eventually, not like, I want to say, like, a Fox News is more left than they were in the 90s.
Yes.
Because the Republican Party is more left than it was in the 90s.
Yes.
Right. Like abortion, it's removed from the platform. We like the LGB, just leave off the T unless it's Blair White or whoever that says our talking points. We'll let him in.
Yeah.
Things like that. It's always as long as they're based. So I don't see this massive knee jerk the other way, except for I think there's a slight tick up in the number of people against gay marriage, because they see that even though like both political parties overwhelmingly favor it, people saw that the slippery slope was not a fallacy, it was a prediction that came true.
Yes.
Right. And so and that's why I think the Gays Against Groomers and a lot of gay rights groups are anti-trans, because they think they're dragging them down now. Things are going backwards because they hopped on the movement and usurped it. Now it's all LGBTQ plus whatever, and that's one hairball now, and so the backlash to that is coming up. I'm one of those people that I want to see the Supreme Court overturn.
Obergefell, yeah.
So I'm in that camp, and he's about to talk about that. So let's listen to another clip where he bashes the right wing a little bit here. This is from the little watched nighttime program by Steve Colbert.
He now canceled.
Yeah, they're now canceled. Progressive Catholic, Steve Colbert.
Has gotten you attention out there is that you are a Presbyterian seminarian. Presently?
Yes.
You're a seminarian?
Yes.
Okay. The right attempts to co-opt Christianity, to say that you can't believe in God, you can't believe in Christ. I think that Donald Trump might have said something like that at the National Prayer Breakfast, like you can't actually be a Christian and be a Democrat. But the religious right is it's largely a political movement that references spirituality, but it's a political. What is your heartfelt hand out to the people who want to use religion as a tool of political power?
Well, for 50 years, the religious right, a political movement, that is the perfect description for it. They convinced a lot of our fellow Christians that the most important issues were abortion and gay marriage. Two issues that aren't mentioned in the Bible, two issues that Jesus never talked about. Jesus in Matthew 25 tells us exactly how you and I and every one of our fellow believers, how we're going to be judged and how we're going to be saved. By feeding the hungry, by healing the sick, by welcoming the stranger. Nothing about going to church, nothing about voting Republican. It was all about how you treat other people. Don't. I've said before, don't tell me what you believe. Show me how you treat other people, and I'll tell you what you believe. And I think in our faith, we've got to get back to those fundamentals. My granddad was a Baptist preacher in South Texas, and when I was little, he told me that Christianity is a simple religion. Not an easy religion, he would always clarify, but a simple religion because Jesus gave us two commandments: love God and love neighbor. And there was no exception to that second commandment.
All right. Love God, love neighbor. Jesus never talked about abortion or gay marriage. And the religious right has duped us all into thinking those were the most important issues. And they seem to be kind of important when how almost 50 million babies have been sacrificed since the 70s. Mm-hmm. It seems like that's when you're a nation that kills babies, more babies have died than people owned slaves during slavery. We've sacrificed, and slavery was horrible, and I'm glad it ended. I think abortion is as or more horrific than slavery was, and so I think that's kind of a big deal. And turns out gay marriage is a big deal too. The idea that Jesus never talked about it, Jesus did talk about marriage because gay marriage wasn't a thing, and he affirmed page 1 of the Bible in Matthew 19. Verse 4, haven't you read? He replied, that he who created them in the beginning made them male and female. And he also said, for this reason, a man leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two become one flesh. That is marriage to Jesus. So anything not that from page 1 of the Bible is not marriage to Jesus. So that's not negative inference fallacy. That's just what Jesus believed. There's no evidence that he believed anything else other than that as marriage, right?
Yeah, and the idea that just because we've redefined marriage since 1970 to mean something completely different than it meant for, 4,000 years of human history, and then we impose that definition back on the text and see, well, Jesus didn't talk about gay marriage. That's because gay marriage wasn't even a thought or consideration, an idea in that time, because marriage was primarily oriented towards the principle of being able to procreate, even if you don't invoke scripture. That's what it was. That's what it was always. That's what it always was. And then Jesus narrows marriage to one man and one woman. There was polygamy, of course there was, but Jesus is very specific in Matthew 19 that he says he created the male and female, and the man will leave the father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So Jesus affirms only a one man and one woman marriage, even though there were other marriages. There were other marriage types practiced. His definition in Matthew 19 only affirms that creation definition.
Right. And furthermore, even if you want to go the polygamy route, it was still not, there was no gay marriage arrangements in polygamy.
No, because gay marriage wasn't a thing. It couldn't be. It was a category not even imagined or thought of.
Right. It was a categorical error, more or less. So yeah, he's just, he seems disinterested in dealing with what the Bible actually says. Matthew 25, the love your neighbor as yourself. Go read Leviticus 19:22. Go read the chapter. Go read the chapter before that.
Yeah.
And Leviticus 18, especially verse 22, if you want to. But read Leviticus 19. You know, love your neighbor in Leviticus 19 has a context, and Jesus has a context in the parable of the Good Samaritan. He says, love your neighbor is everyone without exception, but that can't possibly be true because Jesus did not identify the robbers or the priests or the Levite as neighbors. He said the Samaritan, this is what a neighbor does, right?
Yeah.
So obviously, there are three categories at least that Jesus identified as not neighbors. Right. So neighbor can't mean everybody because Jesus excluded a priest, a Levite, and the robbers from the category of neighbor. So no, not everyone is your neighbor. Sorry, Jesus excludes people from that.
And people tend to misunderstand the Good Samaritan story. Jesus isn't defining what love is in that story. He's defining what a neighbor does in that story. Who is the neighbor? And much to the religious elite's chagrin, it was not the religious elite that were the neighbor. It was the outcast Samaritan who acted as they should have, as they should. If you really believe what you say you believe, it's funny because he says, act like, what did he say? He said something like, act and then I'll tell you what you believe.
Yeah.
Okay, to a certain degree, that could be true. But the problem I have is it's this redefinition of love as well that James is smuggling in to say, love your neighbor. Okay, even if I take your framing of what a neighbor is, let's say I grant that. What do you mean by love? How do you love your neighbor? You let them do whatever they want. You let them explode definitions. You let them explode institutions. You let them redefine marriage and redefine sexuality and gender. That's what loving your neighbor means. That's what love means. No, love is loving somebody for their own good in accordance to what is really real and truly true, in accordance to reality. And so I can't love my daughter or my son if I'm not steering them into what is really true and really good and noble. That's not true love. So he's also, not only is he redefining neighbor, he's also redefining love and then packaging that as the Christian message and handing it to people. And then he gets applause because people don't know what those terms actually mean.
Yeah. And then Matthew 25, this is another one that you see the progressive Christians running to. Let's read it. Do you mind if I read it?
Go for it.
Yeah. The king will say to those on his right, come, you who are blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you invited me in, naked and you clothed me. I was sick and you visited me. I was in prison and you came to me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink? And when did we see you as a stranger and invite you in, or naked and clothe you? And when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer them, truly I say to you, to the extent that you did it for one of the least of these, let's skip some words, you did it to me. Now the words that everyone skipped is, what least of these brothers or sisters of mine.
Mm-hmm.
This is not a generic everybody. And Craig Keener is a conservative Christian scholar, I grant you, but he's not known for conservative politics. He's conservative theologically, and I bet you he's a political moderate, or something along those. He's not a very political guy, but you can kind of get a guy since I've met the guy. He's, he's very theologically conservative, but he doesn't get a whole lot of, just political about issues, except for when the Bible intersects. So we had him on, and when we were talking about Romans 1, and he was talking about how progressives try to rewrite the men lie with men, and he's conservative and all of that stuff. But you just don't see him as being some sort of right-wing political juggernaut.
Yeah.
This is not who Craig Keener is. But here's what Craig Keener, probably the best New Testament scholar we have, certainly the smartest New Testament scholar we have. Here's what he says on page 605 of his Gospel of Matthew, a socio-rhetorical commentary. He says, but in the context of Jesus's teachings, especially in the context of Matthew, this parable addresses not serving the poor on a whole or receiving, but receiving the gospel's messengers. So not just serving the poor in general, but receiving the gospel's messengers. Elsewhere in Matthew, disciples are Jesus's quote unquote brothers in 12:50, 28:10. Also the least, the disciples are the least in 5:19, 11:11, 18:3-6, 10:14. Likewise, one unwittingly treats Jesus as one treats his representatives, chapter 10, verse 40 and 42, who should be received with hospitality, food, and drink. Imprisonment could refer to the detention before until trial before magistrates, Matthew 10, 18, and 19, and sickness to physical conditions stirred by the hardship of mission.
Mm-hmm.
This is not now I'm all for prison ministry. I'm all for soup kitchens. I'm all for all of that. But Matthew 25, verses 34 and following, is about what you do to those on gospel mission. The brothers and sisters of mine, in the context of Matthew's gospel, it's not about a general hungry and feeding and the stranger or whatever. The stranger here is not every former inmate of a South American country who crosses our border illegally. It is, it is the stranger who's bringing the gospel message to the towns around Israel. They are not even, they're and he doesn't even have global mission yet when he said this, right? Yep. So he's talking about, but he probably has that in view for the future because it's a final judgment parable. But still, the idea that this is about everybody, every human being, it goes back to the love your neighbor thing, that you just say everybody, you be in, everyone's your neighbor and love your neighbor as yourself. Well, no, the robbers aren't my neighbor. So I'm not going to be the Samaritan to the robber who breaks into my house. I'm going to probably be the executioner to the robber who breaks in my house. And especially if it's at night, I have a verse in Exodus that says I can kill him. So, so stop with this. Stop with this. And too many conservative Christians grant these premises of of progressive Christians without doing any exegetical work whatsoever. They grant the premise, and then they try to find other ways to get around what they're saying when they haven't even, they grant the premise, and then they try to find a way out of it. I'm saying don't even grant the premise. When they say you have to love your neighbor, and that means, you have to welcome the stranger, that means every illegal border cross. No, there's nothing in the Bible that says that. There's 3 different words about alien and stranger in the Hebrew, and they all mean different things. And go look it up.
Yeah.
I tweeted about this. It was like,
and they mean different things in the context that they were written. A foreigner is different. A foreigner is different in ancient Rome or in ancient Near East than it is now. Those are 2 different terms. A sojourner is something different.
Yeah,
it's a different category. But I was going to say, when they do redefine these things, they actually redefine the gospel itself. You notice that he did that in that conversation with
how we get saved.
How we get saved is we go and feed the needy and the poor, and because I said no, how we get saved is we hear and believe the gospel.
Right.
And if we hear and believe the gospel, what we're going to do is we're going to feed the gospel bringers. We're going to, when the gospel bringers are persecuted, we're going to serve them, we're going to care for them. When the gospel bringers don't have clothes, we're going to rally together and get them clothes so that they can go and do their mission. That is a completely different framing. If you do it the way, if you allow them to frame it the way that Talarico does, it completely and fundamentally changes the gospel in total.
Yeah. Now, I believe that if you want to feed hungry people, go for it. I'm all for that. But that's not what Matthew 25 is about.
Yeah.
It's not about going and starting prison ministries.
Yeah.
I'm all for it. If God puts that on your heart and you want to go do that, amen. Go preach the gospel in prison.
Yep.
I mean, Jesus went to the prison in the underworld to preach the gospel, so go for it. You know, he went to go gloat and say that that's how I take that in 1 Peter 3, that he went and gloated to the spirits in prison. But
I think
whatever.
Is that Michael Heiser? That's Michael Heiser's position, right? That he.
I just have not read a whole lot of Michael Heiser, but probably so. But that's it's one of the four major positions you could take. Some people think is the Old Testament saints he went and preached to, and different takes. But I think Peter had Tartarus on his mind. If you go to 2 Peter, he says it explicitly. He doesn't use the Hades or hell language or Gehenna language, and that is like the deepest part of the underworld where the ghastly creatures are. And so I think for him, he made them the demonic spirits from the time of Noah that were cast down. And I see it as the victory lap take there. But I'm all for going to prisons and doing prison ministry. I'm all for that. But that's not what Matthew 25 is about. Mm-hmm. And you can't make it about something the author never intended, because then you will apply it wrongly hermeneutically to your present if you get it exegetically wrong for what it meant to the original author and audience. So
so let's see what you think of this. One of the ways I think John's gospel almost reframes even this, I don't know if he's referring to Matthew 25 specifically, but is when he quotes Jesus as saying, "And this is how they will know you're my disciples, how you love one another as I have loved you. You must love one another."
Correct.
I think that is maybe it's the same conversation. I don't know, the idea that John taught. It's not
a direct parallel from the synoptics, but it is similar. It's along the similar lines of it's to foster the kinship bonds of the community of believers in Christ, with all being children of God. They're part of the same divine family, and it is a particular love that's more than just and this is where the non-Calvinists, they need to settle down here. There is different kinds of loves in John's gospel. There's a universal benevolence, but there's also a particular kinship, or technically a fictive kinship type of love for the believing community. And so, it's okay to acknowledge that, right? Because clearly Jesus is talking about a more familial type of love than just a generic love for people halfway across the planet,
Yeah, and it's that love, that specific love, that is actually going to engage and intrigue the people that observe it. And they go, well, what are you guys doing? Like, how do you take care of each other like that? Well, we'd love to make you part of the family, but this is what it requires.
Yeah, that's actually what, especially in the context of social persecutions and suffering, that's exactly what all the apologists' favorite verse, 1 Peter 3:15, always be prepared to give an answer for the hope within you. To give an answer means you were asked, right? Yes. And what is it all about? The 1 Peter talks so much about being children of God, born again into the divine family. You have God as your father, how you're to treat one another within the Christian community, in love as this fictive kinship. That's, all through chapter 2, you are a royal priesthood nation for his own possession. You are a family, a divine family. And then even when you're in the midst of suffering, 1 Peter 3:13, 14, 16, and 17 is all about how you're behaving, how you're acting. That's what prompts the question of, like you just said, for why you give an answer. Why are they even inquiring? Oh, it's because you're doing right. You're keeping a clear conscience. You're doing good, even if you're slandered for it. I wish apologists would actually, it's not about believe it or not, 1 Peter chapter 3 is not about teleological and cosmological arguments. If anything,
It's about the moral argument.
Yeah. If anything, the hope within you ties back to 1 Peter 1:3 about, being born again into the living hope because of the resurrection of Jesus Christ, from verse 3 of chapter 1. So the hope is, so if you want to pull apologetics, and Mike Lacona's got it, on lock, because the resurrection is like the thing that's all throughout First Peter. So if you want apologetics, tie it into 1 Peter 3:15, then the resurrection is where you go. But yeah, I love the point. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I've been going through that, and I like to chastise apologists for not understanding what 1 Peter 3:15 even means, even though they quote it out of context for their books. But yeah, stop granting primacies to progressives on these Bible verses they've ripped out of context. You do some real scholarly work on Matthew, and you can, Craig Keener, by no means the bastion of right-wing conservative politics, is like, yeah, this is not about in general. This is about the gospel bringers, as you said. Amen. We got one more clip to go through, and then we'll give some thoughts on it, and then give some final concluding thoughts. This clip is about the separation of the church and state that he goes on about.
It's why I fought so hard for that sacred separation in our First Amendment, because my granddad, he raised me to believe that that boundary between church and state doesn't just benefit the state or our democracy, although it certainly does, but it also benefits the church. Because when the church gets too cozy with political power, it loses its prophetic voice, its ability to speak truth to power, its ability to imagine a completely different world. And so this separation between church and state is something we have to safeguard. It's something we have to fight for. And I think we need someone in the U.S. Senate who is going to confront Christian nationalism and tell the truth, which is that there is nothing Christian about Christian nationalism. It is the worship of power in the name of Christ. And it is a betrayal of Jesus of Nazareth. All
right. So a guy who says who preaches in pulpits, right? Who preaches in pulpits and wants to run for the United States Senate, believes in separation of church and state, and he wants to because these people are trying to use political power. So he's seeking political power as a Presbyterian seminarian who preaches in pulpits to do what again? Probably pass laws in line with his misreadings of Matthew 25 and the Gospels and everything else, no doubt. Right? So Christian nationalism,
it's a boogeyman.
I'm not the biggest fan of the Reformed Christian nationalism or the Catholic Christian nationalism and how they're all going to get along one day if they ever become our overlords. Not a fan of it, but I don't see that as any different than his Christian nationalism, or maybe it's Christian quasi-nationalism or Christian globalism, perhaps. I don't know what it is, but it is. He still has he wants to serve in government, which means he wants to pass laws that you and I have to obey at gunpoint, because all laws are gunpoint laws in the United States of America. You pay taxes at the point of a gun. You drive the speed limit at the point of you do everything at the point of a gun. Try to run away from the cops. When he pulls you over, he will draw his weapon because he has no other reason. Everything is at gunpoint.
Yes.
Everything. And so I don't quite understand this critique against Christian nationalism and separation of church and state when it seems to be, seems like he wants the power he's accusing his the Christian right for 50 years that he mentioned in the other thing.
Yeah, I think...
What's your read on all that he just said?
I think what he's trying to say is, well, if I get the power, I will use it to make sure people can live how they want. But if the evil conservative Christians get the power, they'll foist religious belief onto people and force conversion and force worship, and they'll do these evil bad things. I'm the good type of Christian that is going to get in and limit the government's power in those regards. Now I'm going to increase the government's power in every other regard. Right. In every other area, I'll increase the government's power. But
because he thinks that we all have a religious duty to the gospel to fund SNAP in perpetuity,
Yes.
regardless of the amount of fraud or the obesity rates.
Yeah. He believes in open borders without exception. He believes in all these things. He believes in murdering children in the womb and unmitigated access
because
to
of the
that.
incarnation in Jesus, right?
Yes.
All
yes.
of this stuff.
And even trans women, right? And so I think that's what he's getting at. But even if I were to rewind it to the very beginning, show me the separation of church and state in the First Amendment. Now, Congress is not supposed to make any laws that compel worship or forbid people from gathering. Separation of church and state is not. It's read into the First Amendment by a Supreme Court decision in the 1800s.
Yes,
which is fine because Jefferson wrote to the Danbury Baptist. But what is he writing about? He's saying the government will not compel people to believe in a particular form of Christianity. That's all the separation of church and state is supposed to be. So this idea that, well, the church shouldn't have any influence because of the separation of church and state because of the First Amendment. First of all, it gets the First Amendment wrong. Second of all, it gets the idea of separation of church and state completely wrong. And third of all, it's not even what you're doing. You are also using your faith to influence all of your positions. So it's even untenable for all of the reasons that we just said. So I wish we would stop invoking that. I think it's just a boogeyman to say evil right-wing people are going to force you to be Christians or force you to not have abortions because they hate women. That is not what the separation of church and state was not supposed to protect abortion.
Christian nationalism is nothing new. It's just new for the right because the left has had Christian nationalism for decades.
Oh yeah.
The black church has been political since forever. They've stopped being effective since the civil rights movement. Their last win was in the 60s. They've become just a useless add-on state religion for Democrats now. No offense, just saying, this is not a mystery, but the black church has always welcomed Democrat candidates to their pulpits on Sunday mornings and preached their version of Christian nationalism for decades. And then the second a Republican speaks in the pulpit of a right-wing conservative evangelical church, they're like, oh, take away their tax-exempt status. The same time that Democrat politicians are appearing in pulpits and fake preaching with the preacher voice, especially in black churches. So,
and not only that, they will preach sermons that are expressly. I mean, I thought I saw one in the last election cycle where they preached expressly praying for God's intervention so that Kamala Harris would become president.
Right.
And be like, well, if there's any violation of the tax code of whether or not you should be able to endorse candidates, you've just violated it. But David Platt gets in trouble, who is no bastion of conservatism, by the way. David Platt gets in trouble because he prayed for Donald Trump when Donald Trump was either at a service or at an event. I don't remember. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I mean, in fairness to Platt, Donald Trump was not present for the service. He stormed in during service and then was invited up to be prayed for and then left. So it's not like he was just sitting in the audience for the entire service. From what I could be wrong, let me clarify, I could be wrong. My memory could be failing me, but I don't remember him actually. I mean, he was in his golfing outfit when he took his cap off.
So he had a tea time.
Huh?
He had a tea time.
Right. So I think he just kind of stormed in there to get prayed for by David Platt, which was actually kind of funny, but I don't believe in crashing church services. But
no, I don't either. But my point was that David Platt got in trouble for even that.
Yeah.
Like he's, and as far as, and I'm no David Platt fan. I actually think Radical's a horrible book. But all I will say is what my point is with that is that even David Platt recognized, well, I'm going to pray for my Christian leader. And then he got in trouble for that because of quote unquote Christian nationalism. And so there is a complete different.
There's a double standard. And unless y'all think I'm only picking on the black church, progressive Christians and the mainline denominations, same thing. They're overwhelmingly white. Yeah. They're also dwindling. Same thing. And like the black church, they're not particularly effective in political change either. The black church used to be, but not anymore. Mainlines used to be when they were conservative. in this country could affect political change. But ever since they went crazy to the left, mainlines, but they've always been inherently political. I mean, the church, the Presbyterian lady, the PCUSA lady, or the Episcopal lady, whatever she is in that church that burnt down across from the, she gives anti-right-wing screeds as sermons every Sunday, right? I mean, you can watch them on the internet. And then the one time that Trump advanced and everybody was in there, you could just see them rolling their eyes at all of her gibberish. But yeah, I mean, white progressives in the black church have been overtly, not hiding it, political, and we hear all of this complaint about white evangelical GOP voters, right? They're so mixing politics and religion, as if main lines and black churches haven't been doing that for decades. So don't listen to any of that without calling them out on it's no different. In fact, they do it less because, for reasons that escape me, white evangelical churches are more nervous about politics in the pulpit, when literally none of the left, whether it's the black church or the mainline white progressive, none of them have any problem with it. It's only cowardly white evangelical preachers that want to shy away from politics when they should actually be more political from the pulpit, in my opinion.
Yeah. And they don't even have to get political. The problem I have is a lot of times they won't even address outright theological issues that are in the political landscape, like refusing to preach on abortion because that is covered as a political issue, refusing to preach on marriage. Not that they refuse, but they're just like, well, I'm a little bit nervous about that because what if some people are in our church and they get mad because I took a stance on this issue? Be like, but that's not just a political issue. You're not talking about tax code, which, to be fair, I think you could maybe talk about what a government should be able to do from the pulpit. But that's not tax code. Those are moral issues that are clear in Scripture.
Yeah, and my criticism is not of main lines or black churches being inherently political. My criticism is the double standard, where we're going to complain about them doing it, but it's okay when we do it.
100%.
That double-mindedness, that's a dishonest skill, and God hates those. So that's all I'm saying. I don't care that you do it, but don't have a double standard about it. And always complain. And I get on our urban apologetics friends for this all the time, because they seemingly never run out of gas of punching right, but it is like pulling teeth to get them to say the most mildly critical thing of anyone on the left, whether it's a politician or a pundit or whatever. And that's why you don't see me doing a whole lot of stuff with them anymore, because they're double standards. I am a proponent of consistency, and when I see inconsistency and I see lip service to, well, we don't like both sides, and it's 100% punching right, I'm like, okay, I get in enough trouble with our conservative base here because I punch in all directions, and you're my dear friend, your dear friend Tim Stratton, him and I mix it up on political stuff because I won't carry water for Republicans or whatever. But what I don't like is I don't mind that he does, because I don't tell other people what they can say. Just be consistent. So, don't complain about liberal black churches and mainline churches being political if you want to be political, and vice versa. I'm all for everyone being able to say whatever they want from the pulpit. It's just, don't be mad that the other people are doing it if you're going to do it too. Don't have a double standard about it. So that's all I'm going with that. But we've had Christian nationalism. It's just, what kind of Christian nationalism? Is it going to be leftist, progressive, liberal Christian nationalism? Is it going to be the conservative right wing? Is it going to be the we hate Israel people nationalism? Where are we going with this? Well, we can have those conversations. I want none of it, but I want 1980s America with Duran Duran and all, and Indiana Jones flicks. I just want that again.
The good Indiana Jones flicks, not
the good ones, right? 89 when I guess it was 89 when Last Crusade came out.
Yeah,
that was your sign that the 80s are over. cross, no crystal skull, no dial of
Yeah.
dysentery or whatever it was called. Yeah, I want 80s America again. Dirty Dancing,
Yeah.
Footloose, all that kind of stuff. Pizza Hut buffets.
Yeah, I do miss the Pizza Hut buffet. Those were legit.
That kind of. I've always been a fan of cultural Christianity. I know a lot of Christians aren't. They're like, oh, I'm glad cultural Christianity. No, when you had cultural Christianity, even the people who faked it at church that lived 2 doors down, they're not breaking into your house. So God bless culture. At least that was they may not have been born again, but they also weren't kidnapping kids or breaking into your car. So amen for cultural Christianity. So I'll take 1980s America over any sort of Christian nationalism from the left or the right or the far left or the far right or whatever. That's kind of where I'm at. But this idea that Talarico, it's the double-mindedness of here I am because I'm a noble leftist in his mind, that I can integrate my faith in everything that I want to do, but shame on them for doing it. Just the nerve of being able to say that without embarrassment,
yeah, it's either a blind spot or complete disingenuity. Is that a right word? Is that a word?
Disingenuousness.
Yeah.
We can make up words. It's fine. They do.
Yeah. That's true. Trans women. That's amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this kind of stuff is just, I don't know.
Yeah. So people are celebrating that the conservatives are celebrating that he beat Jasmine Crockett. I'm actually not. I actually think it's more dangerous that he is on the ticket as a Senate. I don't think he'll win. Maybe he will, but I doubt he'll win in Texas. She definitely wouldn't have won. But see, at least she isn't silver-tongued. And that's what I'd say. He could be a snake oil salesman. I mean, he's a snake oil theologian, that's for sure.
Right.
Like, his theology can't be backed up by reason, can't be backed up by logic, can't be backed up by exegesis. His theology is poor. It's inconsistent. His politics are clearly, as you just stated, are double-minded. There's inconsistent measures. And don't kid yourself. He will carry that into office if he gets into office. He will carry this inconsistent justice to be foisted on others and not on his own side. And there are Republicans and people that do that too. Like I think you've said, what'd you say? Republicans are just Democrats with a parachute or something like that. I don't know.
Democrats driving the speed limit.
Oh, Democrats driving the speed limit.
Or speed bumps for the Democrats.
Yeah.
They're doing a good job of that in my mind.
Yeah, and so I think it's actually more dangerous because he could pose, if people are sick of what has happening with Republicans, which many could be and should be in a lot of senses, because literally they don't do anything and then they brag about not doing anything. And then the things that they do are often counterproductive. So if that happens, he is able to talk in such a way that the average person that sits in the pews and can be manipulated using this weaponized empathy can be convinced to vote for somebody like that.
Like him. Oh, he loves Jesus. He's a nice looking, disarming, unthreatening, a very unthreatening, somewhat effeminate kind of guy, and so average, especially church ladies, well, he's not so bad, and he talks about Jesus. He said Jesus, yay. Yeah. I can say, especially single church women, because they already left, they always, no offense, but single church ladies, and I'm not stumping for patriarchy, but they do have the more empathetic type of thing that can be drawn more leftward.
And I actually think a lot of pastors are too. There's a lot of pastors that
mostly
are driven by empathy and they can start to be pulled that direction. I've told people,
of course,
we need pastors who are not so afraid of women.
Yeah, 60 to 65% or higher of their congregations are women.
Yeah,
that's why. That's true in every demographic of church: white evangelicalism, black evangelicalism, Hispanic evangelicalism, whatever. And even in Catholicism, you're going to find more women than men, usually 60-40 or more women. And when you have 350,000 Protestant churches across the country, and most of them have fewer than 60 people in them, you go to any typical Southern Baptist church out in rural county somewhere, and it's going to be 9 or 10 elderly women, and then maybe 3 or 4 elderly men, and then a couple of families, and that's it. So I mean, that's typically. I think the reason why the pastors are like that is because their congregations are mostly women.
Could be, yeah.
So we need more patriarchy, I guess, right? Is that
Yeah, coming from the you're the egalitarian, right? So
yeah.
There you go.
Well, but I'm also sexist.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right.
a sexist egalitarian.
I'm also a jerk.
Yeah.
there's that part too. I can't stand most egalitarians.
I actually had to convince somebody. They saw you and Dr. Tim getting into a conversation back and forth, and they're like, "Man, that Pritchett doesn't like Tim very much, does he?" And I go, "No, they love each other. That's their love language. Is harsh debate, and then they'll hang out with each other later."
That's me and Braxton every Trinity radio or every other Trinity radio. That's me and Braxton every day in my office while I'm trying to work, and he's bugging me while I'm trying to work, wanting to argue with me about something. But yeah, it's all for fun. Yeah. It's also more entertaining to watch than all this love fest agreement stuff we got going. Yeah, but I agree with you. This dude is dangerous because he can be misleading and silver-tongued and snake oil and all of that. And I hope in Texas, I'm going to be interested to see, like you, I don't think he'll win just with the D next to his name, but I wonder if he performs better than like Beto did or some of the past people who ran against Ted Cruz. And I don't know who he's running against in this general. Is it Cruz or whoever the other guy is?
I think it's the other guy. I don't think Cruz is up.
Yeah, I don't even know who the other guy is. That's
me neither.
Yeah. But yeah, I think Democrats like this are a double problem because not only are their politics trash, but just as Christian nationalism on the right is getting more prominence in Congress, now you have Christian nationalism on the left, right? Just because it's progressive doesn't mean it's not Christian nationalist, right? If it's looking at the intersection of Christianity and government, it's a kind of or you could say it's the Christian globalist because he's an open borders guy. Between those two options, I'd probably go with the nationalism over the globalism, but
which is why
this is the bizarro thing of just Christian. He just represents the bizarro world of Christian nationalism. Yes, but it's the same cloth kind of thing.
Which is why I guffaw at the idea that separation of church and state means you shouldn't bring your religion. It's like, what are you going to bring to bear when you're making moral decisions concerning legislation? You're going to bring your faith to bear. So whether you're progressive or conservative, that's going to happen. So we need to drop this whole idea that separation of church and state means I need to be an atheist in the legislation room. That's not how it works. And that's not how it was intended to work. It was just intended to work that I wouldn't create a law or co-sign a law that would force people in Maryland to be Lutherans. Right?
There you go.
So the other senator is John Cornyn, by the way. And it sounds like he's in a runoff with Ken Paxton for their so it could be a dangerous seat, especially if it's a Republican that doesn't have name recognition, and Talarico does have name recognition right now. Politics is weird, but in Texas, I think sometimes a lot of people will see the R even in midterm.
Yeah, I don't think I like John Cornyn or whatever his name is. I don't think he's all that great of a guy. I certainly have been a critic of Greg Abbott, their governor. I was sad to see him win the primary because it seems to me it's like there's the Texas people that I know, and then there's the politicians they vote for, and I'm like, y'all are nothing alike.
Yeah,
like Ted Cruz, really? I don't like that guy. He's all right.
Ted Cruz is at least an originalist. He probably would be better as a Supreme Court justice than he is as a senator.
Yeah, that's probably true. He was all right when he was younger, the Tea Party Ted.
Yeah.
But this late stage Ted is decaying empire Ted. No, we could do without him. All right, Josh. Well, I appreciate you coming on to talk about this problem that we have with progressive Christians now infiltrating. If you think Christian nationalism is a problem, this is even worse, in my opinion. Progressive Christianity is not Christianity.
100%.
And what we don't need is to have national brand recognition for this slop any more than it already has already. We need to keep fighting against it with the truth, biblical truth, the gospel truth, and it's nothing that these progressives on X or now in the political sphere or Joy Reid, the cussing Christian at her little faux State of the Union alternative program, all that stuff, gross. We got to fight against it. All right.
Yep.
Appreciate you watching. Before we go, where can they find you and what do you got coming up?
Yeah, you can find us at Free Thinking Ministries. I'm usually there with Dr. Tim Stratton. You can find me on X. I'm active on X, often making snide remarks on political and social issues. Josh R. Klein on X. Pritchett follows me, so that is either a recommendation or a warning. Those are the two. Those are the two options there. And then you can find us on Facebook, Free Thinking Ministries. We've got as we're recording this in a few hours, we're going to do a live stream with a Persian American Christian about the war in Iran, or whatever we call it in Iran, because we can't declare war until 60 days anyway. Right. We're going to be doing that, how Christians should think about that sort of thing. So you can find all that sort of stuff on Free Thinking Ministries on YouTube.
All right. And with that, if you want to also, Tim Stratton, his partner at Free Thinking, is also a professor here at Trinity College of Bible Theological Seminary. So you want to take courses from Dr. Tim Stratton, maybe one day even Josh, if he can ever finish his PhD, or myself, or Dr. Braxton Hunter, or Leighton Flowers, or any of the Chris Featherstone, people you've actually heard of before from the comfort of your home. At a price you could afford, go to trinitysem.edu. That's trinitysem.edu. If you want to support Trinity Radio, you can do that at patreon.com/Trinity Radio. With that, we'll see you next time on Trinity Radio.